My fiancé's family invited me to a surprise family meeting. When I arrived, they handed me a breakup agreement. The Ellison family estate looked like something from a dream as I drove up the long, winding driveway. Autumn leaves cascaded around my car, creating a golden tunnel that led to the intimidating colonial mansion I'd visited dozens of times before. I checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror. My dark hair neatly styled, minimal makeup, and the pearl earrings Michael had given me for our 3rd anniversary. Perfect. I wanted to look my best for whatever surprise family meeting Michael's text had mentioned. Come to dinner tonight. Mom and Dad want the whole family together. Dress nice. That was all he'd written. No explanation, no time to prepare. Just a cryptic message that had kept me wondering all day. I'd spent the afternoon imagining what the surprise might be. Perhaps they were finally warming up to me after 2 years of dating and 8 months of engagement? Maybe they wanted to discuss wedding plans? The Ellisons weren't known for their spontaneity, so whatever prompted this gathering had to be important. As I approached the massive front door, a strange heaviness settled in my stomach. I dismissed it as nerves. The Ellisons always made me feel like I was walking on eggshells. I rang the doorbell and plastered on my most confident smile. Patricia Ellison, Michael's mother, opened the door with her signature icy smile. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, not a strand out of place, and her pearl necklace gleamed against her black cashmere sweater. Olivia, right on time. Her tone was pleasant, but her eyes were cold, assessing me as if I were merchandise she was considering returning. Come in. Everyone's waiting. I brought wine, I offered, handing her the bottle. It's that Bordeaux Mr. Ellison mentioned enjoying last Christmas. She barely glanced at it. How thoughtful. The grand foyer echoed with my footsteps as I followed Patricia through the house. Strange, usually, the mansion buzzed with staff preparing dinner, music playing softly in the background. Today, there was nothing but silence. We entered the formal dining room, where the entire Ellison family sat around the long mahogany table, positioned as if for a business meeting rather than a family dinner. Robert Ellison, Michael's father, sat at the head, barely acknowledging my presence with a slight nod. Michael's older brother Christopher and his wife Vanessa occupied one side, while Michael sat alone on the other, staring at his hands. My heart fluttered at the sight of him. Even now, after all this time, seeing his face still made me feel warm inside. But tonight, he wouldn't meet my eyes. That was my first warning. Have a seat, Olivia. Robert gestured to the chair at the foot of the table, directly opposite him, the position of a defendant before a jury. Thank you, I said, trying to maintain my composure despite the strange tension in the room. What's the special occasion? No one answered. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Christopher exchanged a knowing glance with his father. Patricia took her seat beside Robert. Shall we get straight to the point? I'm sure Olivia is curious about why we've gathered tonight. Robert cleared his throat and reached for a leather portfolio beside his place setting. Olivia, let me be frank. When Michael first brought you home, we were skeptical. You seemed pleasant enough, but we know how these things usually go. I'm sorry, I don't understand, I replied, glancing at Michael, who still wouldn't look at me. Robert continued. We've had concerns for some time now. Your background, your ambitions. The timing of your relationship with Michael coinciding with his promotion. And suddenly an engagement. My mouth went dry. What exactly are you implying? Patricia's lips curled into something resembling a smile. We've been patient. We wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt. But it's become clear what your intentions are. Robert slid a sealed envelope across the table. It stopped directly in front of me, the heavy cream paper bearing the Ellison family crest. What's this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Open it, Christopher said, leaning forward with an eagerness that made my skin crawl. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out several pages of dense legal text. As I scanned the first paragraph, my blood turned to ice. A breakup agreement? I looked up, certain this had to be some elaborate, cruel joke. Is this for real? Robert nodded solemnly. We know why you're here, dear. We'd rather settle this amicably before it gets messy. What are you talking about? I could hear the tremor in my voice. Patricia sighed dramatically. Please, let's not pretend anymore. We know you're only after our money. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent 2 years working to gain their approval, walking the fine line between being myself and being the person they wanted Michael to be with. I'd endured their subtle jabs, their condescension, their constant reminders that I didn't belong in their world. Christopher chuckled, breaking the tense silence. He reached into his jacket pocket and tossed a folded check onto the table. It landed with a soft thud that somehow echoed in the cavernous room. It's more than fair, Robert said, nodding toward the check. Take the money and leave. No fuss, no drama. Just a clean break. The check was for $250,000, a humiliating sum meant to compensate me for my time with Michael. As if our relationship could be reduced to a transaction. I turned to Michael, the man I loved, the man who had promised to stand by me through anything, the man who had whispered just last week that he couldn't wait to start our life together. You're going along with this? I whispered. His silence cut deeper than any insult his family could have hurled at me. Patricia leaned back, swirling the wine in her glass. Be smart, darling. We have resources. If you try to cause trouble, we'll make sure you regret it. I understood then what this meeting was really about. They wanted to see me break. They wanted me to beg, to cry, to plead for my place in their world. They wanted to confirm every suspicion they'd had about me, that I was desperate, grasping, unworthy. Instead of tears, I felt my lips curve into a smile. All right, I said, picking up the check and tucking it into my purse. Let's play. Their expressions flickered with confusion. This wasn't the reaction they had expected. Little did they know, they had just declared war on the wrong woman. And I was already planning my revenge. You can't be serious. Michael finally found his voice as I tucked their insulting check into my purse. His face had gone pale, watching me accept their terms without protest. I tilted my head, studying the man I thought I knew. Is there a problem? I'm simply taking what's being offered. I thought you'd fight for us. His voice cracked, revealing the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him all evening. A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Fight? While you sit there and let your family humiliate me. That's rich, Michael. His parents exchanged satisfied glances. This was exactly what they wanted, to expose the real me they believed existed beneath my carefully cultivated image. The gold-digging opportunist they'd convinced themselves I was. Well, this is going better than expected, Patricia remarked, pouring herself more wine. I told you she'd take the money, Robert. They always do. My fingers tightened around my purse. They always do. How many other women had they done this to? How many hearts had they broken to protect their precious family fortune? Robert slid the breakup agreement closer to me. Initial each page and sign at the bottom. It's fairly standard. You agree to end the engagement, return the ring, cease all contact with Michael and our family, and waive any future claims against the Ellisons. I picked up the Mont Blanc pen he offered, worth more than what most people made in a month, and flipped through the pages. As I scanned the document, my legal training kicked in despite my emotional turmoil. The agreement was airtight, drafted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. There's also a confidentiality clause, Christopher added gleefully. You can't talk about this meeting or the agreement to anyone. No tearful social media posts, no revenge tell-alls. I met his gaze as I signed my name. I wouldn't dream of it. The ring, please. Patricia extended her hand, palm up, fingers wiggling impatiently. I twisted off the 3-carat diamond engagement ring, the symbol of a promise now broken, and placed it in her waiting palm. She immediately tucked it into a small velvet pouch, as if touching something that had been on my finger for 8 months might contaminate her. Well, that concludes our business, Robert said, gathering the signed papers. James will show you out. The elderly butler appeared at my elbow, seemingly from nowhere. Had he been waiting in the shadows all this time, anticipating my dismissal? I stood, smoothing the wrinkles from my dress. One question before I go. Robert raised an eyebrow. Yes. Was any of it real, Michael? I turned to the man I'd planned to spend my life with. Did you ever love me at all? Michael's eyes darted to his father, then back to me. I thought I did. A non-answer. The final cowardly blow. How touching, Patricia murmured sarcastically. Christopher laughed. Don't take it personally, Olivia. You lasted longer than most. Almost made it to the altar. Enough, Christopher, Robert warned, though his tone lacked any real rebuke. I looked around the table at the family that had nearly become mine. Their satisfied smiles, their casual cruelty, their absolute certainty that they were superior to me in every way that mattered. I'd like to propose a toast, I said suddenly, reaching for the untouched wine glass at my place setting. Patricia blinked in surprise. A toast? Yes. I raised my glass. To the Ellison family. May you all get exactly what you deserve. I drank deeply, savoring the rich wine while they exchanged puzzled glances. Then I set down my glass with deliberate care. James, I can see myself out. I walked through the grand house for what they thought would be the last time, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Each step took me further from the life I'd thought I would have and closer to the one I was about to create for myself. Outside, the cool night air hit my face, and I finally allowed my facade to crack. Tears blurred my vision as I fumbled with my car keys. Not for the loss of Michael. That pain would come later, but from the sheer humiliation of it all. The calculated cruelty. The way they'd treated me like a commodity to be bought and discarded. I sat in my car for several minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, breathing deeply until the shaking stopped. Then I wiped my tears, reapplied my lipstick using the rearview mirror, and started the engine. As I drove away from the Ellison estate, my phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I answered on speaker. Olivia, Save it. My voice was steadier than I expected. You made your choice. You don't understand. My family is everything to you. I get it now. I paused at the end of the driveway. Tell me something, Michael. Did you know what they were planning tonight? His hesitation told me everything. That's what I thought. I ended the call and blocked his number. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Miss Chen. A woman's professional voice came through the speaker. This is Samantha Wells from Pierce, Morgan & Associates. Your grandmother requested I call you immediately after you left the Ellison residence. I smiled, the first genuine one of the evening. Tell her it went exactly as she predicted. She'll be pleased to hear that. She's waiting for you at the office. The team is assembled and ready to proceed with Operation Checkmate, as you requested.
Thank you, Samantha.
I'm on my way. I ended the call, a strange calm settling over me. The Ellisons had no idea who they were dealing with. They saw what they wanted to see. A nobody, a gold digger, a threat easily neutralized. They thought they'd won tonight. But the game was just beginning. The offices of Pierce, Morgan & Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek downtown skyscraper. At 10 p.m., most of the building was dark, but the 50th floor blazed with light as I stepped off the private elevator. My grandmother, Eleanor Chin, stood at the head of the conference table, commanding the attention of a dozen impeccably dressed professionals. At 76, she remained a force of nature, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, designer suit tailored to perfection, eyes that missed nothing. When I entered, she paused mid-sentence. Olivia, right on time. Grandmother. I crossed the room and accepted her brief embrace, the most public affection she ever displayed. They went through with it? She asked, though she already knew the answer. I nodded, placing the signed breakup agreement on the table. Exactly as you predicted. A thin smile crossed her lips. The Ellisons are nothing if not predictable. She turned to the assembled team. For those who haven't met her, this is my granddaughter, Olivia Chen. Harvard Law, top of her class, followed by an MBA from Stanford. She's been working undercover at Rivera Tech for the past 3 years, gathering intelligence for our expansion into the semiconductor market. I looked around at the surprised faces. Most knew me only as Eleanor's quiet granddaughter who occasionally attended company functions. Few knew I'd been working 80-hour weeks building my own division within my grandmother's vast business empire. The Ellisons believe she's a jewelry designer with a small boutique. Eleanor continued, amusement lacing her voice. A nobody they could easily dismiss. One of the lawyers laughed. They have no idea you're the heir to Chin Global? None, I confirmed. I wanted Michael to love me for myself, not my family's wealth or connections. Eleanor snorted. A foolish notion I warned you against. Men like Michael Ellison are raised to see marriage as a merger, not a partnership. I couldn't argue with her. She'd been suspicious of Michael and his family from the beginning, but I'd been blinded by what I thought was love. Tell them what happened tonight, my grandmother instructed, taking her seat. As I recounted the evening's events, I remained clinical, detached, the way Eleanor had taught me to handle business matters. Only when I described Michael's silence did my voice waver slightly. When I finished, Eleanor pushed a folder toward me. The Ellison family financials, as requested. Robert has overextended himself on their latest development project. They're leveraged to the eyeballs. I flipped through the documents, nodding. That explains the desperation behind tonight's performance. They need Michael to marry into money, not spend it on a wife they see as a liability. Precisely, said Eric Pierce, our lead corporate attorney. Robert Ellison has been quietly approaching potential investors to shore up Ellison developments. So far, no takers. I looked up. And our offer? Ready to present through Wellington Partners, Elena Morgan replied. They'll never trace it back to Chin Global. My grandmother studied me. You understand what this means, Olivia? We're not just teaching them a lesson. If we proceed, we dismantle everything the Ellisons have built. 2 months ago, I would have hesitated. But that was before I'd sat at their table and been treated like a commodity. They declared war first, I replied. I'm simply responding in kind. Eleanor smiled, the proud, fierce smile that had struck fear into corporate boardrooms for decades. Then let's begin. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out the check. Their insulting payoff. My grandmother took it, eyebrows rising at the amount. A paltry sum. I want it framed, a reminder of how they valued me. She nodded in understanding, then addressed the room. Phase 1 begins tomorrow. Ms. Rivera, your team will initiate the proxy purchases through the shell companies we've established. Mr. Daniels, prepare the financial disclosure packages for the Ellison investors. Ms. Morgan, draft the acquisition proposal. The room buzzed with activity as the team dispersed to their assignments. My grandmother gestured for me to follow her to her private office. Once alone, she poured 2 glasses of Macallan 25, her celebration drink. To your first corporate takedown. I accepted the glass. I never wanted this. Few do. But when pushed, a chun pushes back. She studied me. Are you having second thoughts? I thought of Michael's betrayal, his family's cruelty, the casual way they'd tried to erase me from their lives.
No.
No second thoughts. Good. Because there's something I haven't told you yet. She tapped her tablet, bringing up a series of emails on the large monitor. Michael wasn't just passive in this scheme. He helped orchestrate it. I scanned the messages, exchanges between Michael and his father, discussing the Olivia situation, planning the meeting, debating the appropriate compensation to offer me. The room spun as I gripped the edge of my grandmother's desk. He was behind it all, not the mastermind, but a willing participant. Eleanor's voice softened slightly. I'm sorry, Olivia. I hoped I was wrong about him. The last fragile thread of hope I'd been clinging to, that Michael had been coerced, that he still loved me despite his weakness, snapped. Show me everything, I said, my voice hardening. Every detail of Operation Checkmate. I want to understand exactly how we're going to destroy them. Eleanor nodded approvingly. That's my granddaughter. As the night deepened, we refined our strategy, a meticulous plan that would dismantle the Ellison empire piece by piece, leaving them with nothing but the knowledge that they had ruined themselves by underestimating the woman they had tried to humiliate. By dawn, Operation Checkmate was no longer just my grandmother's plan. It was my mission. For weeks past, I buried myself in work, barely sleeping as I orchestrated every aspect of Operation Checkmate. The Ellisons had gone quiet, clearly believing their problem had been solved with a check and a signature. Michael had tried reaching out through mutual friends. "He's devastated," they told me. "He made a terrible mistake." I listened politely and said nothing. On the surface, my life continued as if nothing had changed. I opened my jewelry boutique each morning, the small business that had been my cover for 3 years. Customers had no idea that between helping them select necklaces and rings, I was executing million-dollar stock purchases through my tablet. By week 3, Wellington Partners had acquired 22% of Ellison Developments through various shell companies. Another investment group, also secretly controlled by Chun Global, had purchased 15%. We were carefully staying under the reporting thresholds, keeping our activities invisible to the Ellisons. "The Robinson property deal is closing tomorrow," Elena Morgan informed me during our daily briefing. "Once it falls through, Ellison Developments will be in breach of their loan covenants." I nodded, studying the financial projections. "And the Westbrook investors?" "Pulling out, as expected." Our whisper campaign about Ellison's financial troubles worked perfectly. The Robinson deal had been Robert Ellison's last hope, a massive commercial development that would have solved their cash flow problems. What he didn't know was that Chun Global had already purchased the property through a subsidiary, effectively blocking his only escape route. "Your grandmother is impressed," Elena added. "She didn't expect things to move this quickly." "Neither did I admitted. "They're more vulnerable than we thought." That vulnerability became public the following day when Ellison Developments stock plummeted 38% after news broke about the failed Robinson deal. Financial blogs started questioning the company's stability. Creditors began calling in loans. The Ellison annual business gala couldn't have been scheduled at a worse time for them, or a better time for me. The event was their most prestigious gathering of the year, where the family showcased their success to Boston's elite. Canceling would have been an admission of defeat. So, despite their financial crisis, the gala proceeded as planned at the Ritz-Carlton Ballroom. My invitation, sent months ago when I was still Michael's fiancé, had never been rescinded, an oversight they would soon regret. I arrived fashionably late, wearing a Valentino gown that cost more than the compensation check they'd given me. The ballroom fell silent as I entered, conversations halting mid-sentence as heads turned. Patricia Ellison was the first to spot me, her champagne glass freezing halfway to her lips. Robert stood nearby, deep in conversation with potential investors who were now staring in my direction. Christopher nudged his father, pointing subtly toward me. And Michael. Michael looked as though he'd seen a ghost. I moved through the crowd with deliberate grace, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. People parted before me, whispers following in my wake. "Isn't that Michael's ex? What is she doing here? Did you hear about their stock price?" Robert recovered first, striding toward me with a forced smile. "Olivia, this is unexpected." "Is it?" I tilted my head. My invitation was never withdrawn. "A regrettable oversight," Patricia said, appearing at her husband's side. "Perhaps it's best if you leave." I finished for her. "I don't think so. Not when I have such interesting news to share." Michael approached cautiously, his face pale. "Olivia, please. Whatever you're planning." "Planning?" I laughed lightly. "I'm simply attending a gala. Though I am curious about the Robinson property deal. I hear it fell through rather spectacularly." Robert's smile faltered. "A temporary setback." "Of course," I agreed. "Just like your stock price dropping nearly 40% is temporary, or your Westbrook investors pulling out." The color drained from his face. "How do you know about Westbrook?" Instead of answering, I glanced at my watch. 3, 2, 1. As if on cue, the large screens around the ballroom, meant to showcase Ellison Development's projects, flickered to life. But instead of promotional videos, they displayed a breaking news bulletin. Breaking: Wellington Partners announces majority acquisition of Ellison Developments. CEO Robert Ellison to step down. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Robert staggered backward as if physically struck. "What is this?" he demanded. This is impossible. Is it? I moved closer, lowering my voice. You should have done your due diligence on Wellington Partners, Robert. On who actually controls it. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You. Me. I raised my glass in a mock toast. Or more precisely, Chin Global. Chin Global. Patricia repeated, confusion evident on her face. The international conglomerate? I smiled. My grandmother says hello. The shock on their faces was everything I'd imagined during those sleepless nights planning this moment. Michael looked like he might be sick. You're Eleanor Chen's granddaughter? Christopher blurted, the implications finally hitting him. But you said you were a jewelry designer. I am. I'm also Harvard Law, Stanford MBA, and the newly appointed CEO of what was formerly Ellison Developments. I took a delicate sip of champagne. The board meeting is tomorrow at 9. Don't be late, Robert. We have a lot to discuss about your transition. Patricia's hand flew to her pearls. This is outrageous. You can't just. I already have. I looked directly at Michael. You made me the villain in your story, so I became one. As cameras flashed and reporters who'd been tipped off swarmed into the ballroom, I turned to leave, my revenge only half complete. The Ellisons had lost their company. Now, they would lose everything else. The morning after the gala, I arrived at Ellison Developments headquarters at precisely 8:30 a.m. The security guards who had once barely acknowledged me now scrambled to open doors. The receptionist who used to make me wait now jumped to her feet. Miss Chun, we weren't expecting you until 9. I like to be early, I replied, heading toward the executive elevator. Upstairs, the boardroom was already filling with shell-shocked executives and board members. They stood when I entered, uncertainty evident in their expressions. These were the same people who had looked through me at company functions, dismissing me as Michael's insignificant plus one. I took my seat at the head of the table, Robert's former chair. Where's the Ellison family? Asked Warren Stevens, the longest-serving board member. They've been invited, I replied. Whether they choose to attend is up to them. At 8:57, the door opened. Robert entered first, followed by Christopher. Both men had the haunted look of someone who hadn't slept. Patricia came next, her perfect composure notably absent. Michael trailed behind, his eyes fixed on the floor. Please take a seat. I gestured to the chairs on my right, not their usual positions of power, but subordinate places. Robert remained standing. This is ridiculous. You can't possibly expect us to.
Sit down.
My voice was soft but carried unmistakable authority. He sat. Now, I began. Let's discuss the transition. Chun Global has acquired 64% of Ellison Development shares. As the new majority shareholder, we've made some decisions. I nodded to my assistant, who distributed folders to everyone present. First, Ellison Developments will be rebranded as Meridian Properties, effective immediately. Second, the current executive team will be replaced. You can't do this, Christopher protested. My father built this company from nothing. Actually, he didn't. I corrected him. He inherited it from his father, who acquired the original properties through some rather questionable means during the 1970s real estate crash. I glanced at Robert. We've had our legal team review those transactions. Fascinating reading. Robert's face paled further. As I was saying, I continued. The executive team will be replaced. Robert, you'll be stepping down as CEO, effective today. Christopher, your position as COO is also terminated. Patricia found her voice. This is outrageous. You can't just throw away decades of experience. I'm not throwing it away, I replied calmly. I'm correcting a long-standing problem. Ellison Developments has been systematically underpaying female employees, passing them over for promotions, and creating a hostile work environment. All of which is documented in detail in Section 3 of your folders. The board members flipped pages, murmuring as they read the damning evidence my team had compiled. That brings me to personnel changes. Diane Harris will be promoted to CEO. Diane, A brilliant executive who had been repeatedly overlooked for advancement despite outperforming her male colleagues, looked up in shock from her place at the far end of the table. Jennifer Okafor will become COO, and Lucia Reyes will take over as CFO. I continued announcing promotions, all highly qualified women who had been sidelined under Robert's leadership. This is revenge, Robert spat. Pure and simple.
No, Robert.
This is good business. These women have consistently outperformed their male counterparts while receiving less recognition and compensation. That ends today. I turned to the rest of the board. You'll find that the restructuring plan is comprehensive and designed to maximize profitability while correcting long-standing inequities. As the meeting progressed, Michael remained silent, staring at the table. When we broke for a brief recess, he approached me hesitantly. Can we talk? Privately. I considered refusing, but decided against it. 5 minutes. My office. Once behind closed doors, he seemed to deflate. I never thought you'd go this far. You never thought I could. I corrected him. There's a difference. Olivia, I know I made a terrible mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Michael. What you did was a betrayal. He ran his hands through his disheveled hair. My family was pressuring me. They said they'd cut me off if I married you. I was weak, and I'm sorry. Cut you off from what? I asked. The company that's no longer theirs? The fortune that's rapidly disappearing? What exactly did you gain by choosing them over me? He had no answer. You know what's ironic? I continued. If you had stood by me, if you had chosen love over family pressure, you'd now be engaged to the future CEO of Chun Global's North American division. Funny how things work out. The color drained from his face as the full magnitude of his mistake hit him. I glanced at my watch. Your 5 minutes are up. Back in the boardroom, I concluded the meeting by addressing the elephant in the room. Some of you may wonder if these changes are motivated by personal feelings toward the Ellison family. Let me be clear. They absolutely are. A shocked murmur ran through the room. But they're also sound business decisions backed by data and projections you'll find in your packets. The previous leadership was driving this company into the ground through nepotism, discrimination, and poor management. That ends today. I stood, gathering my papers. One final announcement. Christopher Ellison's position has been eliminated entirely. Christopher jumped to his feet. You can't do this. I've worked here my entire life. Your work record speaks for itself, I replied, sliding a performance review across the table. Consistently late, habitually unprepared, repeatedly reprimanded for inappropriate behavior toward female employees. He snatched up the paper, his face contorted with rage. This is all because I threw that check at you, isn't it? Because I humiliated you? No, Christopher. This is because you're terrible at your job. As he stormed out, Patricia followed, throwing me a venomous glare. Robert lingered, looking lost in the boardroom he had dominated for decades. Was any of it real? He asked quietly. Or was getting close to Michael part of your plan all along? I met his gaze steadily. I loved your son, Robert. That was real. Everything else, this takeover, your downfall, that's just business. As he shuffled toward the door, I added, the kind of business you taught me. 3 months passed. Summer turned to autumn, and the leaves around Boston blazed with the same fiery colors as the day I'd driven to the Ellison estate for that fateful family meeting. Meridian Properties, formerly Ellison Developments, was thriving under its new leadership. Stock prices had recovered and surpassed their previous highs. Employee satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. The toxic culture that Robert had cultivated was being dismantled piece by piece. I had accomplished everything I set out to do professionally. The Ellisons had been removed from power. Their family legacy was being rewritten. Their fortune was diminishing rapidly as legal fees mounted and investments collapsed. But personal closure still eluded me. My grandmother noticed. We were having our weekly dinner at her penthouse when she set down her fork and fixed me with her penetrating gaze. You're still thinking about him. There was no point denying it. Eleanor Chin could read me like no one else. Sometimes.
Why?
You've won, Olivia. By any measure, you've emerged victorious. I stared out at the Boston skyline glittering beyond the windows. It doesn't feel like victory, because revenge never does, she said simply. It satisfies a hunger, but creates a new one. I've seen it many times. Then why did you help me? Because some lessons can only be learned through experience. She took a sip of wine. What will you do now? I had been asking myself the same question. I'm not sure. Yes, you are, Eleanor countered. You've always known. You're just afraid to admit it. She was right, as usual. The plan had been forming in my mind for weeks. The next morning, I called a meeting with Diane Harris, the new CEO of Meridian Properties, and outlined my intentions. By afternoon, the paperwork was drawn up. By evening, it was signed. There was one final piece of business to attend to. I drove to the Ellison estate without calling ahead. The grounds looked different now. The once immaculate gardens showed signs of neglect. The fountain in the circular driveway no longer flowed. 3 luxury cars were missing from the garage. James, the elderly butler, answered the door. His eyes widened in recognition. Ms. Chun, this is unexpected.
I know.
Is the family home? He hesitated, then nodded. In the sunroom. Shall I announce you? No need. I remember the way. I followed the familiar path through the mansion, noting subtle changes. Empty spaces where valuable art pieces once hung, a layer of dust on the antique side tables. The family's financial decline was evident in these small details. I found them in the sunroom, a tableau of fallen aristocracy. Robert sat with a tumbler of scotch, staring at financial documents. Patricia leafed through a society magazine, her face pinched with bitterness. Christopher was absent. I'd heard he'd moved to Florida after failing to secure another executive position. And Michael sat by the window, looking out at the garden, a ghost of his former self. They froze when I entered, shock registering on their faces. What are you doing here? Patricia demanded, recovering first. Haven't you done enough? I placed a leather portfolio on the coffee table. I came to deliver this in person. Robert eyed it suspiciously. What is it? More bad news. That depends on your perspective. Michael finally spoke, his voice rough from disuse. Just tell us, Olivia. I opened the portfolio, revealing the documents inside. I've signed over my shares of Meridian Properties to the company's employee stock ownership plan. Robert blinked in confusion. You're giving away your controlling interest?
Yes.
The company will be employee-owned, with the current executive team remaining in place. Why would you do that? Patricia asked, suspicion lacing her voice. Because I never wanted your company, I replied simply. I only wanted you to understand what it feels like to be treated as a commodity, to be valued only for what you represent, not who you are. Robert's hands trembled as he reached for the documents. This is unexpected. There's one more thing. I reached into my purse and pulled out a familiar piece of paper, the check they had given me the night they tried to buy me off. I placed it on the table. I never cashed it. Michael stared at the check, then at me. Why? Because this was never about money. For any of us. I turned to leave, but Michael jumped to his feet.
Wait. We can fix this.
Now that you've made your point, we could. Fix what? I asked, truly curious. Us, he said, a desperate edge to his voice. I made a terrible mistake. I should have stood by you. I see that now. For a moment, I allowed myself to remember what it had felt like to love him. The plans we'd made. The future I'd imagined. You didn't just fail to stand by me, Michael. You were an active participant in my humiliation. You helped plan it. He flinched at the truth. I didn't come here for reconciliation. I continued. I came for closure. You threw me away like trash. Now, you're exactly where you belong. Patricia stood, indignation flaring. How dare you speak to us this way in our own home? I smiled. Your home? You should check with your bank. I believe foreclosure proceedings begin next week. Her face crumpled, confirming what my sources had already told me. As I walked toward the door, Michael called out one last time. What happens now? I paused, looking back at the family that had nearly been mine. You rebuild. Or you don't. That's entirely up to you. I left without another word, the weight I'd been carrying for months finally lifting as I walked down the driveway. The revenge that had consumed me was complete, not in the destruction I'd caused, but in my decision to walk away from it. In my car, I opened my phone to a text from my grandmother. "Is it done?" I typed back, "Yes, I'm free." And for the first time since that terrible night, I truly was.